So now, again, moving on into June. This is when everything starts to heat up, literally.
Yeah.
And, well, we're starting off with, we did talk about the swine flu.
Yeah.
Earlier on.
Yeah, the swine flu was before June, sorry, because we kind of skipped over it, but the swine flu was, was declared non-pandemic at the time because it got so much media attention, and then WHO was, had said it went from a level 3 to 4 to 5, so people were really sweating, what's going to happen, and then all of a sudden, as flu season passed, it kind of died down, and then reheated itself back up again right before this year's flu season, but then again, the vaccine was made available. A lot of debate about should you or shouldn't you get the vaccine.
All right, so back to June.
Yes.
Okay, so senior report made available.
Yeah. This was, I can't recall if people remember this, but it was along the lines of, seniority has been debated now for the last few years, and it's always, how are we going to recover our lands? And if we can't recover these properties, then what do you want in return? Do you want land? Do you want money? So the seniority report was made available back in June, where people came out saying, well, we would like land. Money's money, but you can't build on money.
It's not a new. It's not a new issue. Going back
years and years.
Like hundreds of years.
The scenery, every time you hear the scenery, it just kind of makes you want to, run. Because everyone's like, oh.
Yeah. Okay, so then again, the official election list was announced, all the nominations, and then the ongoing Keith Mayo story.
Saga. I call it the saga.
The saga, yes.
And it's no disrespect to anybody, but it's just that
it just continues.
The community's been dealing with it.
Yes.
And then there was also some rumblings about Kahnawake Gilbert's eligibility. If you remember, some people said, well, he hadn't lived here, and at that time,
there was nothing.
There was nothing. Lindsay didn't think that it was an issue. And I know that I did speak to Kahnawake prior to it ever becoming an issue, and he did tell me that there were some people that were, making it a bit of an issue. So, but everything went on as planned. The elections went on as planned, and there were some candidates that had withdrawn during the campaign, which made it a little bit more interesting. And then at the time, Keith filed an injunction on the elections, but they ended up proceeding as planned. But all this went down at midnight, which was really amazing to me. I remember Mike and I were at home, and my daughter was literally just born, and it had to have been on a Tuesday or Wednesday. I had just come home from the hospital, and we hear, and I look at the time, and I felt like I hadn't slept in a month, and there's a bailiff standing at the door, so he had literally delivered documents to, I don't know if other media had got them at midnight, but I know that Mohawk TV did, and we had sat up with, and she was home in bed with us, and we sat up reading everything, and I was thinking to myself, I was like, wow, this is a first, it had never happened before, and it was only going to make the elections that much more interesting this year. But you were with K103 at the time, so how did you guys handle it?
It was a big year for, just looking at the issue, for the MCK. I mean, the position they took on it, a lot of people will say is the right one, or they agree with. I'm not going to say it personally, but they made a big move by refusing to obey the Canadian court ruling and maintaining, our jurisdiction on who we want as elected officials, and the rules concerning that. So that was a shock. It came as a shock,
I was just going through actually some of the
press releases.
The press releases from 2009, and the one thing that it says here, according to the notice, because he had served the Mohawk Council with a lawyer's letter. And in here it stated July 2nd, and he says, according to the notice, Keith Mayo's attorneys will take all recourses available seeking the observance of the injunction, including contempt of court. And I know that at the time, I believe that, if you recall, Lindsay had called an emergency community meeting to deal with this. And then all of a sudden it was off. Because I think once the lawyers were consulted with, they said, well, no, we're doing it anyways. You're not going to tell us what to do in our own jurisdiction. This is our elections. No Canadian court is going to tell us how to run our elections. And this was really split in the community. I remember some people saying, you know what, I do not personally appreciate, whether they were a Mayo supporter or not at the time, it was, I don't appreciate Keith bringing outside jurisdiction into the community. People, and then on the other hand, you had people saying, well, how is he going to get a fair shake if he doesn't? Because obviously him being tried here in the community and in the local court, it's not going to be without bias.
Right.
So.
Well, yeah, I mean, the other thing is he feels that he was wronged, right? So, I mean, that has to be respected as well, you know.
You know, we'll skip ahead a little bit, but after the dust settles and the elections go on as planned, and, you know, in the meantime, with the judgments going back and forth and the lawyers' letters flying, Keith ends up withdrawing at the end of the day and says, you know what, we'll deal with it another time. The elections go on as planned, and then you think, okay, we have a council in place at this point. You know, you had 12 people elected, and you had some new people, you know, like, which was Carl Horn, Kahnawake, Sky Deer. You had John D. returning. There was the youth were well represented, and Ganyet Dario. So I think it was only a matter of 2 weeks maybe, or 3 weeks that had passed when somebody filed a complaint saying that they felt that he didn't meet the eligibility requirements, criteria. So that went to the court, and then they ended up upholding that, saying yes, he didn't. You know, so now, although Ganyet Dario wasn't thrilled about, you know, the news, there was a lot of people who supported him being in there. Then a by-election was announced. Lindsay, once again, was the electoral officer. So it just seemed like it was the year of firsts for elections, you know what I mean? The injunction, and now a by-election, which had never been held, you know, so... and then you only had a few people running. And at the end of the day, it was, it ended up being Clinton Phillips, yeah, to get elected, and which was really ironic because if you look at, you know, he came in right after Ganyet Dario, so people thought that he should have just naturally moved up into his position. But because there was no process in place for a by-election, nobody knew how to handle it.
We'll be back with more, with the best of 2009 right here on Sawana Artewake.